What if I told you that one of the most influential food cities in the world isn't in France, Italy, or Japan? It's in Canada. And not Toronto. Vancouver. A city that sits at the edge of the Pacific, built by loggers and fishermen and wave after wave of immigrants who had no common language but eventually found one at the table. I'm Drew, and today we're going all in on 10 foods that were straight up invented in Vancouver. Some of these changed the way the entire planet eats. One of them you have had thousands of times and have definitely been calling by the wrong city's name. Welcome to Dish Decoded. Let's decode this. Food 1. The California Roll. Let's get this one out of the way immediately, because this is the Vancouver food that has been misnamed for 50 years. And the city has never fully gotten credit for it. The California Roll was not invented in California. It was invented in Vancouver. The man behind it is Hidekazu Tojo, a classically trained sushi chef who immigrated from Osaka, Japan in 1971. He arrived in a city with exactly 4 Japanese restaurants. Vancouverites were not eating raw fish. They were scared of seaweed. Traditional sushi was going nowhere fast, so Tojo did something radical. He flipped the roll inside out, rice on the outside, nori hidden in the middle, and filled it with ingredients Canadians were comfortable with: cooked crab, avocado, and cucumber. No raw fish, nothing intimidating. He called it the Tojo Roll. His clientele at the time were largely visitors from Los Angeles. They loved it. They took it home. Los Angeles ran with it, and somehow the name stuck. California Roll. In 2016, the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture honored Tojo as a goodwill ambassador of Japanese cuisine. You can still order the original at Tojo's restaurant in Vancouver, where it appears on the menu under its real name. The rest of the world calls it California. Vancouver knows the truth. Food 2. The BC Roll. Same chef, same restaurant. A completely different kind of invention. In 1974, Tojo had a problem. A traditional Japanese sushi staple is unagi, barbecued saltwater eel. Saltwater eel was nearly impossible to source in Vancouver, but Vancouver was sitting on one of the richest salmon fisheries in the world. So Tojo did what great chefs do when they can't get what they need. He found something better. He took Pacific salmon skin, coated it in the same sweet glaze used on traditional unagi, and grilled it until it was crispy. Then he built a roll around it: salmon skin, cucumber, rice on the outside. He named it after his province, the BC Roll. The name celebrates British Columbia's wild Pacific salmon, an ingredient so abundant and so distinctly West Coast that it turned a substitution into an identity. Today, the BC Roll is on the menu at virtually every sushi restaurant in the city and is one of the defining examples of how Vancouver turned local geography into its own culinary language. Food 3. The Japadog. In 2005, a former Tokyo advertising executive named Noriki Tamura arrived in Vancouver with his wife Misa. They had a plan: open a crepe stand. Vancouver's street vending bylaws immediately killed that plan. The city allowed exactly one type of food cart: hot dogs. Tamura had just enough money to open a single stand. He spent 3 months apprenticing at other hot dog carts to learn the basics. Then, rather than compete with over 100 identical hot dog vendors, he did the only sensible thing. He started putting Japanese flavors on top. The flagship creation was the teri mayo, a sausage topped with teriyaki sauce, Japanese mayo, and shredded nori seaweed. Early sales were nearly zero. Tamura and his wife ate their own unsold hot dogs for dinner. The Japanese community found them first. Then word spread. Then Anthony Bourdain showed up. Then the 2010 Winter Olympics came to Vancouver, and suddenly the Japadog stand had lines of 100 people stretching down the block. What started as a regulatory workaround became an entirely new food category. The Japadog is now served across Vancouver, into Surrey, Burnaby, and Richmond, with recent expansion into Toronto and beyond. It is the most Vancouver food imaginable. A Japanese immigrant, forced by bureaucracy to sell a North American food, who turned the constraint into something no one had ever tasted before. Food 4. The Nanaimo Bar. Here's where we need to be precise, because the Nanaimo Bar is claimed by the city of Nanaimo, a ferry ride across the water on Vancouver Island, but the story is inseparable from Vancouver. The earliest known recipe appeared in a 1952 women's auxiliary cookbook in Nanaimo, listed simply as Chocolate Square. A year later, in 1953, Edith Adams, the fictional homemaker persona behind the Vancouver Sun's beloved recipe column, published the recipe and named it the Nanaimo Bar. That name stuck. Vancouver gave this dessert its identity. 3 layers: a coconut and graham wafer crust on the bottom, custard butter icing in the middle, chocolate ganache on top. No baking required. It was designed for church suppers and community fundraisers. The kind of food that travels easily in a church hall and keeps well on a tray. It might have stayed regional if not for the Lazy Gourmet, a Vancouver catering company that started selling Nanaimo bars commercially in the 1970s, and then included 3 recipes for them in the official Expo 86 cookbook, the World's Fair that brought millions of visitors to Vancouver. After Expo 86, the bar went national. It was voted Canada's favorite confection in a 2006 National Post reader poll. It was served at the White House State Dinner for Justin Trudeau in 2016. A dessert invented by anonymous women in a Nanaimo church basement, named by a Vancouver newspaper column, and sent into the world by a Vancouver caterer. That's the full story. Food. 5. Indian pizza. In the mid-1980s, Vancouver had the highest concentration of Indo-Canadians of any city in the country. Punjabi immigrants had built a community in South Vancouver, and those communities brought their food with them. Tandoori chicken, paneer, butter chicken, cilantro, ginger, and the kind of spice blends that rewrite what a sauce is supposed to do. And at some point, someone in that community looked at a pizza, a flatbread topped with sauce and protein, and realized it was basically a very large naan, what developed is now called Indian-style pizza, Punjabi-style pizza, or desi pizza. Thicker, crispier crust. House-made sauce built from garlic, cilantro, and a medley of spices rather than tomato. Toppings that include butter chicken, tandoori chicken, paneer, spinach, and cauliflower. The concept spread from Greater Vancouver outward to Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, and eventually Toronto. It is a uniquely Canadian fusion that exists nowhere else in the world in quite this form. No single inventor, no founding restaurant on record. This one wasn't invented at a counter. It was invented in an entire community, across dozens of kitchens, slowly and collectively. That's a different kind of origin story, and it's a very Vancouver one. Before Vancouver was Vancouver, it was Gastown, a rough waterfront settlement of loggers, mill workers, and sailors clustered around Burrard Inlet. In 1870, a hotelier named J. Houston was running the Granville Hotel on Water Street. His clientele were men doing some of the most physically demanding labor imaginable, felling old-growth timber in the forests of British Columbia. They came to Houston asking for a better meal, a real meal, something that could fuel a 12-hour day in the rain and mud. Houston delivered 3 or more eggs, multiple cuts of meat, ham, bacon, sausage, and several large pancakes. The kind of plate that looks like a dare. It became known as the Lumberjack's Breakfast. The format was practical before it was cultural. These men needed thousands of calories before dawn, and a plate of dried salt pork wasn't going to cut it. Today, every diner in North America has some version of this on their menu. We just don't think about where it came from. It came from a hotel on Water Street in pre-railway Gastown, invented for the men who were cutting down the city's future before the city existed. Food. 7. The Chinese Smorgasbord, aka the Chinese Buffet. This one starts in the same era, the same neighborhood, and with the same cast of Scandinavian loggers who helped inspire the Lumberjack Breakfast. Chinese immigrants had come to British Columbia in large numbers, first for the gold rush, then for the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway. Many stayed and opened small restaurants and cookhouses, serving the logging and mill communities around early Gastown. The loggers, familiar with the Scandinavian smorgasbord tradition of communal table service, reportedly began asking the Chinese cooks to change how the food was served. Instead of bringing individual dishes to the table, they laid everything out on a sideboard so people could serve themselves. The Chinese cooks adapted. They built steam tables. They organized the food for self-service. And in doing so, they invented the format that would become the Chinese buffet, one of the most replicated restaurant models in the history of North American dining, now found in every small town from Nova Scotia to Arizona. Nobody planned it. Nobody named it. A group of Swedish and Norwegian loggers in a rough settlement on Burrard Inlet just wanted to eat the way they were used to eating. And a group of Chinese cooks trying to keep their customers happy accidentally changed the restaurant industry. Food. Rainbow Roll. While Tojo gets the headlines for the California roll and the British Columbia roll, his restaurant is also credited as the birthplace of several other now standard sushi formats, including the Rainbow Roll, the Spider Roll, and the Golden Roll. These aren't minor variations. The Rainbow Roll, an inside-out roll topped with sliced avocado and various fish draped over the outside, is now one of the most ordered sushi rolls in North America. All of it traces back to one chef, one kitchen on West Broadway, and a philosophy Tojo has described simply: I don't want a copy. I like to make my own food. In a city that happened to be sitting on a Pacific salmon supply, a growing Japanese community, and a population willing to be adventurous if you met them halfway. Vancouver didn't just invent one sushi roll. It invented the template for how Japanese food adapts itself for the Western world. Food 9. The Japadog spiritual ancestor, Fusion Street food culture. The Japadog didn't appear out of nowhere. It appeared in a city that had been quietly inventing Japanese-Canadian fusion food for decades. When Tojo arrived in 1971, he introduced smoked salmon into Japanese cuisine, a Pacific Northwest ingredient that had no precedent in traditional Japanese cooking. He watched what his customers liked, what they avoided, and what they were already eating at French restaurants across town. He brought those observations back into a sushi context. That approach, take what's here, take what you know, and build something new at the intersection, became Vancouver's culinary identity. The BC roll was that philosophy. The California roll was that philosophy. The Japadog was that philosophy 30 years later. No other city in the world produced this specific brand of Japanese Pacific Northwest fusion, because no other city had the same combination of Japanese immigrant community, wild Pacific seafood, and a dining public that was curious but cautious. Vancouver had all three. And the result is a sushi culture so embedded in the city that there are now more than 600 sushi restaurants within city limits alone. Food 10. The Nanaimo Bar's commercial legacy, or how Expo 86 changed everything. We've talked about the Nanaimo Bar, but there's a second Vancouver food story hidden inside it, and it's about what happens when a city decides to tell the world who it is through food. Susan Mendelsohn founded the Lazy Gourmet in Vancouver in 1979. She started selling Nanaimo bars commercially, claiming to be the first business to do so. When Vancouver hosted Expo 86, the world's fair that drew 22 million visitors, Mendelsohn was chosen to write the official cookbook. She included 3 Nanaimo bar recipes. Millions of people picked up that cookbook and took it home. That decision, to lead with a humble, no-bake dessert that was invented by anonymous women in a church basement, was a statement about what Vancouver's food identity actually is. It's not fine dining, it's not trying to impress anyone, it's community food. Food built out of what's available, passed hand to hand through fundraisers and family kitchens and hospital cookbooks. The Lazy Gourmet is still operating in Vancouver. The Nanaimo Bar is still on every cafe counter in the province. Some foods survive because they're perfect, and some foods survive because an entire city decided collectively that this is ours. 10 foods. And the same pattern running through almost every single one. Someone arrives in Vancouver. They bring a tradition, a technique, or a craving from somewhere else. They can't find the right ingredients, or they can't get the permits they want, or they're cooking for people who don't know what they're looking at. So they adapt. They improvise. They substitute salmon skin for eel. They put Japanese toppings on a hot dog because that was the only cart they were allowed to run. They name a dessert after their town, so the city that published the recipe doesn't take full credit. Vancouver didn't invent food to impress anyone. It invented food because it had to, because it was sitting at the edge of the Pacific with one of the most diverse immigrant communities on the continent and one of the most extraordinary natural larders in the world, and someone had to figure out what to do with all of it. The world ended up calling one of Vancouver's greatest inventions the California roll. Vancouver is fine with that. It knows where the roll really came from. If this one hit different, subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me which food surprised you most. I'm betting it's the Japadog. Stay curious.